I've got a clip for you today from a YouTube channel which I quite like called Thinking Class. It's with a gentleman called John Gillam, and he hosts this program. He gets various people on, and I've seen some decent people on there, and certainly it's a good channel if you're looking to go a little bit deeper on some of the topics that fall within the purview of politics in the modern day. Certainly, it's a channel I would advocate. And I came across this little clip with a man called Tom Jones, and they were having a chat about the unpopularity of Labour and the ungovernable nature of the people of this country at the moment, and the way that politics is failing spectacularly, I might add. And he goes into a couple of little things which I'm going to put on. This clip's about 4 or 5 minutes, but I thought it was fascinating.
Why is it that state legitimacy is so low right now? Perhaps even, where do you even derive state legitimacy from? Because not everyone would recognise that term.
Well, obviously, it's, state legitimacy, I suppose, is from the consent of the governed. I think there are probably two concurrent issues here. And the first is that Labour were delivered to power with a huge parliamentary majority and actually not a particularly large majority in the population. Labour did not get swept to power on a, 1997 or 2019 style switching of the vote. They were delivered to power on the back of basically a complete collapse in the Conservative vote. That just set them up. Basically, as long as their vote held, they were going to win a very large majority, and that's exactly what happened. So I think part of the reason is that it was a vote of... the last election was essentially a vote of kind of no confidence in any of the system. There was a core Labour vote that held up and a core Conservative vote that stayed at home, and a kind of the 2019ers who switched to our side have stayed at home or split off to reform. So I don't think the government was ever as popular as the size of the parliamentary majority would have you believe. I think that's very clearly got even worse, because Keir Starmer is now, I think, the most unpopular Prime Minister at this stage in his leadership of all time, which is quite simply staggering. We now have we used to have three parties on about 30%, but the Tories have really dropped back now. So we're on something like sub 20, around 20, Reform are on about 35, and Labour are kind of around about just top side of 30. And so, that's, for a first past the post system, that's not really sustainable. But then I think there is a second problem to that, which is not particular to Labour, but I think is more of an institutional problem, which is that I think in large swathes of the country, people have ceased to believe that the state is working fundamentally in their interests. I think you see a lot more outrage at essentially a kind of the two-tier system that's coming forward. I think you see a lot of anger about that. I think you see a lot of anger on intergenerational lines because, somebody my age, I'm 30. I think I first 5 years of my life, I had some growth. And then since then, I've not really experienced any long-term, strong or sustained economic growth, and certainly not in GDP per capita, and certainly not in wages. So I think there's a sense that basically the state is no longer functioning as it should. It's not delivering better living standards. It's not delivering safely. And I think there is a really strong protest at the minute against what people increasingly see as a system of anarcho-tyranny.
Now, no doubt, as you've been listening to that, you've come up with your own thoughts about what this Tom Jones was talking about there. But I think he hit the nail on the head completely about where we're going. Now, I think I'm a bit older than this Tom Jones, so I have a better grasp of time in terms of the longevity of time and how things change, and how in lifetimes we tend to think the things that are happening to us are overly important, as opposed to finding context within a historical basis. So now that I'm in my 50s, I can look back and say, this is how that worked, that's how that worked. And at the time it seemed like a big thing, but given the relevance of age and time, we can see that this has all happened before on a number of occasions. But that doesn't detract away from the points that this gentleman was making. And I thought back as he was talking, I started to think back to when I believed that the loss of legitimacy was Brexit. And it wasn't the Brexit vote. I think the vote itself was tumultuous, and it was brutal, and it was all of that, and it did divide populations, yes, and it was part of the general schism of the internet, and how the internet and social media was breaking the traditional ways that we were communicating with people. All of that was going on. But Brexit itself, I sat and watched large swathes of that in Parliament. I thought it was a moment in time, and it was a moment in time, and indeed, that moment in Parliament was where the politicians and the full political class en masse, civil servants, everyone in power, done their very best to not do Brexit. And everyone could see that. It took them years before they could even push a piece of paper up into the air and tell us that Brexit was done. And of course it was never done. And to move on from Brexit into the current people that are leading this country, and the swarm of absolute nonsense surrounding this Labour Party, Keir Starmer, all of his ministers, they're useless. I've tried my best to categorise this stuff in a lot of detail, but I arrive at virtually the same place every time. They're a bunch of useless clowns. And there's no more intelligent way to put it. Keir Starmer is a failure as a politician. It came out last week that he'd said to some confidant, I don't really do politics very well, and this was just before the election, and never a true word was spoken. Yeah, you don't do politics very well because you're a snivelling cretin. And I think the longer he stays in post, this type of embarrassment at his failure, it's going to turn into visceral anger. And anger at what he's doing to this country, not just with the Chagos Islands and giving stuff away with his human rights lawyer friends, but look at how they're destroying the economy. This economy is not going to make it past the next budget. And this anger that you even feel in me coming out there, it's in the nation, and we are not happy with Labour. And how did they come to power? Well, they came to power through epic failure on behalf of the Tories. The Tories failed over 14 years to do anything that they told us they would do apart from gay marriage, which is fine. Have gay marriage if that's what you want. But can you just get everything else right, or some of it right? I mean, look at what the Tories have done to immigration. They can never be forgiven. And all this talk of Kemi Badenoch saying, that was the past. No. It's not the past. It's very much in the present, and you will not be forgiven for that. You will not be forgiven. Not till there's a brand new set of people in. Because everyone knows the Tory party is full of Liberal Democrats. And of course, the Labour Party coming on the back of the Tories. So this is just failure compounding failure. Now we've got a brand new party reform that barely anybody had heard of more than a couple of years ago, looking to be the next government. You see the state of our government. Moving on from that, and I could talk at length about a number of these things, but I'm going to leave it to you to think about your own ways that you believe the legitimacy of the powers that be are waning in a severe and dangerous way. And I think this is obvious to anybody that wants to look. The two-tier Kia, very dangerous. If we start to believe that we're going to throw mothers in prison for tweets, but we're going to let mass rapists out with shorter prison sentences than that lady, then I've got problems with that justice system, and I think a lot of people have, and that is a dangerous place for any authority to be in. If we start to believe that the court system isn't working for us, then we are in deep trouble. More than anything else, I think the legitimacy of our state is crumbling on a daily basis, because the most harmful thing to the people in power and this government is the small boats. Without any doubt, this is the thing that is most harmful to this government and the previous government, and none of the people in power seem to understand. And it's got nothing to do with, well, it has got something to do with culture, race and demographics. Yes, that is part of the argument. But by far, in a way, the thing that damages the government the most is the fact that, as a group of people, we're watching these politicians come out and then go back in and come out like a little cuckoo clock. They get sent out and then they go back in, and this happens time and time again. They are unable to solve the problem of the small boats. They can't solve it. And as a group of people, we're watching the politicians do this, and every single day they are losing legitimacy, because if the government that are looking after us can't solve a small problem like that, what about the larger problems in society? The fact of that the government can't stop the small boats from coming across is a big problem. But that problem pales into insignificance once people actually start to believe, balls to bone, when they believe it, hang on, this government actually isn't in control at all. And when people start to believe that en masse, as we see with the pictures on the internet, where a young gentleman took an angle grinder, he walked through the centre of a busy city centre, and while everyone was walking around him and going to work, he casually took 2 minutes of his time and sawed the lock off an expensive bike that was tied at the train platform, and not one person said anything to him. We're approaching a dangerous time here. We need, in power, a set of ruthless individuals that are just going to say, it all stops now. It all stops now. But we don't have a set of those politicians. The legitimacy of the government of the United Kingdom is failing, and it's going to get worse. And unless it's arrested, we're going to see a complete breakdown in the moral and actual authority of the government of the United Kingdom. And Mr. David Betts won't be too far off the mark at that point. Thanks very much for your time.